Welcome to the final day of a 7-part Earthfest series hosted by Creatively United for the Planet Society in partnership with John O'Riordan of the Gail O'Riordan Climate in the Arts Legacy Series and the Wildwood Ecoforestry Institute Society. I'm Frances Littman, the founder of Creatively United for the Planet nonprofit society and your host again today. Before we launch into this international webinar, I'd like to acknowledge we are hosting this webinar on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people here on beautiful Vancouver Island, for whom we give thanks for this privilege and their stewardship from time eternal. We have much to learn. I'd also like to thank everyone for tuning in. We've had more than 900 people from around the world register for this series, including attendees from India, the UK, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Trevor Hancock, 3 of Earth Day Canada's leading luminaries. Plus, we have an insightful recap of the week by John O'Riordan and Chair of Water and Climate Security at the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health, Bob Sanford, who we were really fortunate to have open this series last Sunday. And if that wasn't enough, we will also be treated to a fabulous live performance once again by the celebrated cellist Brian Yoon. I'd like to introduce Dr. Trevor Hancock. He's a Creatively United board member who also happens to be the first leader of the Green Party of Canada, a co-founder of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, helped establish the Healthy Cities movement, and acts as a consultant for the World Health Organization, co-founded the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare, established Conversations for a One Planet region, writes a weekly column in the Times Colonist newspaper. I'm just going on and on because it's so impressive. Has been awarded an honorary fellowship in public health in the UK and is a passionate Morris dancer and green man who lives in Victoria, BC. Whew, and I didn't even cover it all, Trevor. Thank you for joining us today, Trevor. Over to you.
Thank you, Francis, and good morning, everybody. The joys of retirement. You have time to do all that stuff and then more. So I'm going to jump right into my presentation here. The title speaks for itself. I'm going to be moving fairly rapidly through a set of slides here. I may skip over a dozen or so in the middle. I'll see how we're doing. But the full presentation will be available later. This is what I'm going to talk about. 6 different topics that take us through from the Anthropocene to the notion of bouncing forward, not roaring back. But I want to begin by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory we meet, and by that I mean those of us who are here in Victoria, in the capital region of British Columbia. And I also want to acknowledge all the other presenters that have presented this week. It's been a wonderful week and lots of rich material, and you're going to be lucky enough to have all of this material available to you within the next few days, or next week, I guess, when Frances and her team put it out there. But I also want to, of course, recognize Frances and John. She didn't know that was coming. But also, of course, this is Earth Week. And so I want to acknowledge that I live on the Earth, and this is our only home, and it's the source of life and health for all species. And we may call it by many different names, and I've scattered a few of them on that slide there. The top left one is actually Lekwungen, and beneath that is Maori, and I'm not going to go through all of the languages that are there, but those may have been 2 of the less familiar ones. And so that's also part of our context. And in that context, I want to share with you this short video.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years. 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. My oceans, my soil, my flowing streams, my forests, they all can take you or leave you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
So that is a very beautiful, but very sobering and very realistic assessment of our relationships with the earth, with Mother Nature, and one that we should keep in the back of our minds at all time, which is why I wanted to acknowledge that we live on and depend upon the earth, something that somehow our modern societies have largely managed to forget and that we desperately need to bring back. And so that's going to be part of the focus of my presentation here. So welcome to the Anthropocene. Now, this will be very familiar to many of you, but the point I want to make here is that COVID-19 is not our only planetary emergency. This too is an emergency. This is climate change, and many of you, if not all of you, will be very familiar with these charts. Surface temperature top left, annual CO2 emissions top right, Arctic summer sea ice to the left, global average sea level change to the right at the bottom. We know about this. This is part of, this is, in fact, many people are drawing the analogy, as I will later, between our response to COVID and our lack of response to this, I would argue, much more severe emergency. And that in itself is only a small piece of the puzzle. We need to recognize that it's more than just climate change, that in addition to climate change, we have ocean acidification, which is related, of course, to CO2 emissions, but we also have ozone layer depletion, depletion of all sorts of resources, renewable and non-renewable, high levels of pollution, air, water, and soil, and food chain. And ecotoxicity refers to the toxification of entire ecosystems and food chains. And we carry a body burden, all of us, of persistent organic pollutants because we have let them out into the environment in huge quantities in the last 70 years or so. And they have entered food chains, and Mother Nature then bioconcentrates them back up the food chain, and we sit at the top of a lot of food chains. And then, perhaps most serious of all, species extinctions. And we are a species like any other, and we too can go extinct, but more to the point, we are causing a sixth great extinction. So all of this is happening. It's all happening at the same time, and it's all happening in geological and ecological terms very rapidly. So this is the Earth systems emergency we face. On the top left, the ecological footprint. Starting from 1961, we exceeded, the green dotted line is the Earth's biocapacity, and we exceeded that back around 1970, around the time of the first Earth Day, in fact. The Living Planet Index, the data here is from 1970 again. That is a count, a population count of thousands of different species, vertebrate species. It's declined in multiple populations, 60% since 1970. Planetary boundaries that were mentioned by Bob on the first day, we have already exceeded several likely planetary boundaries, and the yellow shows that we are in a zone of uncertainty and increasing risk for a number of other key Earth systems. And all of this is due to what on the right is called the Great Acceleration. That is to say that ever since the 1950, and the dotted line, vertical dotted line on each chart is 1950, since then in particular, across a variety of different Earth systems, but also across a variety of different social and economic systems, we have seen a massive increase in impact, which has been dubbed the Great Acceleration. So this is, in a word, the Anthropocene. And it's important to understand that the Anthropocene is three different things. Technically and scientifically, it is a geological phenomenon. It is a new geologic epoch. But it also is an ecological phenomenon. So that line that we are laying down of new materials like cement and plastic and glass and new chemicals and higher CO2 levels, things that will be detectable by geologists decades into the future, they represent this massive and rapid ecological change. And the third point is it's a human phenomenon. We are the anthropos, the old Greek word for human, in the Anthropocene, or more precisely, some of us, we particularly in high-income countries and with high incomes, are the main drivers of all of these changes. So it's really a human problem. But it's one where understanding all of this globally, we then need to come down to thinking locally. The problem is that in Canada, we act as if we had this. So our ecological footprint, it's a bit under 5 planets, 4.75 according to the Global Footprint Network. But we act as if we had 4 or 5 planets. In this region where I live, Saanich, the ecological footprint has been calculated by folks from the BCIT and One Earth, Cora Holsworth from One Planet Saanich. And we act as if we had at least 3 and probably more planets. The reality, of course, is this is what we have. We have just one planet. Hence all the focus on becoming a one planet region and the work of One Planet Saanich and the work we're doing with our conversations. So what is a one planet region? Well, when we set up conversations for a one planet region, which I'll talk more about in a minute, we did so with an understanding of what a one planet region is, that you can see there. And note that this involves both social as well as ecological sustainability. So it's no good becoming a one planet region by making a lot of people poor and sick and dying, and by heightening social injustice. So it means that we want to preserve a high quality of life. Note it's quality, not sort of quantity of life in the sense of how much stuff we have, but our higher quality of life and a long life in good health for all, and notice for all, while reducing our ecological footprint to be equivalent to 1 planet's worth of biocapacity. Now that is a huge challenge. That means that we need to reduce our ecological footprint by 70 to 80% in Canada, and to do so fairly rapidly. Now, a good chunk of that footprint is carbon. So focusing on carbon makes a lot of sense, but it's not only carbon, it's not only fossil fuels, it's much more than that. And where it would take us to is only taking our fair share of the Earth's biocapacity and renewable and non-renewable resources. Notice the emphasis on taking our fair share. Equity is a massive concern that we have to address in all of this. Not only that we only take our fair share within our own communities, but much more importantly, that we only take our fair share globally so that others who have far less than their fair share, far less than 1 planet's worth, can, over time, achieve the similar quality of life to that we would wish for ourselves. And that means we have to, at the same time, meet basic needs and ensure high levels of human and social development and good health for all. So this is a social issue as much as it is an ecological issue. And in fact, it's an eco-social issue, and that's the best way to think about it. I just wanted to highlight the work of One Planet Saanich, which Sanych became part of an international project that Puran Desai talked about yesterday in his presentation, part of the One Planet network that he has been working with. But we need to think about this in system terms, and I really like this notion it actually comes from systems engineering, but was framed this way by an organization called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in the context of talking about the healthcare system, but it applies much more broadly. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And we need to think about that. So this is what our current system is delivering. It is perfectly designed to achieve these ends. And if these are not the ends that we want, then to get different results, we're going to have to change the system. And as Naomi Klein said, and she was only talking in her book about climate change, but it actually applies to this much bigger challenge of the Anthropocene, this changes everything. Which takes me to the fourth topic I want to talk about. This is cultural transformation. So I think it's really important to understand this is not a science and technology program. If you go back to Earth Day, and even more particularly, if you go back to the first UN conference on the environment in Stockholm in 1972, there was very little that we're talking about today in terms of global ecological challenges that were not known then. One thing we didn't know then was the hole in the ozone layer depletion, which wasn't discovered until the 1980s. And we hadn't really identified ocean acidification, which has only just been recognized in the last decade or two. But everything else we're talking about here, not only did we essentially know the challenge, the problem, but we also knew the solutions. So it hasn't been a lack of science or a lack of technology that has kept us from doing what we need to do. It has been a matter of social and political and economic and legal and ethical and philosophical, and in some ways, I would argue, a spiritual problem that we face. So this is a social and ultimately a cultural transformation that is needed if we're going to follow the science and technology that we've known for decades and failed, in fact, to follow. So I want to consider a number of approaches, and I'm going to flick through these fairly quickly. These were the slides I thought I might not have time for, but in fact I do. So I'm going to work through them. So this is some of the issues, and there are many others, but these are the sort of top of mind ones for me when it comes to thinking about what we have to change by way of cultural transformation. I start with eco-social justice because I think that's a really important understanding. We need socially just distribution of the Earth's natural capital, remembering that part of that natural capital, a significant part of it, is for other species, not for us. So I see 4 different ways in which we need to implement eco-social justice. One is to do so in our current and local situation. So as we talk about a transition to a one planet region, it needs to be a just transition. And there is a lot of work going on around the idea of a just transition, primarily looking at energy use, but it has to expand its scope. But how do we do this in a way that doesn't harm disadvantaged groups within our own community? And then globally, how do we do this for people who are remote from us? So when we reduce our fair share, it enables others who lack their fair share to increase their share of the pie, because the pie not only cannot keep growing, it has to actually shrink. Then there's a third form of eco-social justice, and that is our responsibility towards future generations. How are we going to make sure that that they have enough to meet their needs, which of course was the definition of sustainable development from the Brundtland Report in 1987, Our Common Future. And then finally, as I mentioned just now, eco-social justice has to apply to other species. They too need their fair share of the Earth's biocapacity and resources. And so we need to think about and incorporate in our thinking and in our policies ideas of intergenerational equity and interspecies equity. That takes us to the issue of legal and ethical approaches. So we should have the right to a healthy environment. And some of you may know David Boyd, who's an environmental law expert living right here in this area, but is also now the UN's special rapporteur on right to a healthy environment, or environmental rights. And in his book on this issue, he pointed out that we're one of the very few countries in the world now that does not have the right to a healthy environment in our constitutional fundamental laws. So that needs to change, and the Blue Dot campaign that the Suzuki Foundation is running is about exactly that. We also need to recognize intergenerational rights, the rights of future generations to a healthy environment. The Welsh actually 5 years ago passed a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Every jurisdiction should have a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and a Future Generations Commissioner, as they do in Wales. Then there are interspecies rights, the right of other species and indeed entire ecosystems to exist. So New Zealand, for example, has granted legal recognition as persons to both the Wanganui River and the Te Urewera region, which was previously a national park. So this is another legal aspect. And then finally, we need to create the offense of ecocide. That should read international law. My apologies for my bad spelling. That harming the environment in the ways that we're doing should in fact be considered an environmental crime against humanity. A third area is to rediscover the spirit in nature. We really need to reestablish a reverence for nature. And this is an important role, not the only role, but an important role for faith communities. It deals with issues of spirituality. They need to be thinking about that as well as their role in proclaiming eco-social justice as an issue. And then this quote, which came from an Indigenous people's statement at a big international conference on health promotion in Rotorua in Aotearoa, New Zealand last year. Within Indigenous worldviews, our relationship with the natural world is characterized by reverence and values that include sustainability, guardianship, and love. We need to bring that within our worldview and our culture too. Then we need massive economic transformation. We need an economics fit for purpose. What sort of economy can meet the goal of achieving good health and a good quality of life for everyone? As I said earlier, every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. And our current economic system is creating massive global ecological harm and massive global social injustice and poverty, and inequality. So we need to create a different sort of economics. As the Worldwide Fund for Nature said in its Living Planet report a few years ago, ecosystems sustain societies that create economies. It does not work the other way around. We have been acting as if it did work the other way around. So we have to completely invert our notion of the role of the economy and recognize it is simply a social construct that we can change, which is, of course, is exactly what Guy Dauncey was talking about in his presentation. And he talked about donut economics, the notion, Kate Raworth's notion of thriving in balance. You have to have an economy that is large enough to ensure a social foundation for all, but small enough that it doesn't impinge upon what she called here the ecological ceiling, those planetary boundaries. And so the donut is that safe and just space for humanity, what she calls a regenerative and distributive economy in the pale green circle here. So that is the kind of economy and economic discussions we need to be having. Fifthly, we have culture wars underway. As is very clear around climate change, there is a political ideology at play here. So if you look at who believes that climate change is a fact and mostly caused by human activity, and this was a study from 2018 by the Angus Reid Institute, 85% of past NDP voters and 81% of past Liberal voters agree. 35% of past Conservative voters only 35% agree, 65% do not agree. And you can see a similar thing with who believes that climate change is a theory that's not yet been proven. This is political ideology at work. It's been described as a culture war, and it's one we are entered into, like it or not. Then there is the notion of changing social norms, the shared expectation of behavior that is considered culturally desirable or appropriate. It causes people to come to act in conformity with the norms of their society. We've seen some social harmful norms, some of which we reversed, in fact, so smoking, drinking and driving. But we have other social norms we need to reverse. The notion that economic growth equates with progress. The notion that the acquisition of wealth and stuff is a sign of success, that bigger and more is better, and that the environment is somehow separate from us and exists simply for our use. These are social norms deeply embedded in our culture that we're going to have to shift. And finally, I want to touch on, of course, one planet politics, and I just want to point out that ecological politics did not in fact begin with the Green Party. It's in Germany. It began way back in 1973, following the publication of Blueprint for Survival, which was published by The Ecologist in 1972 as its contribution to that first UN conference on the environment in Stockholm. And they called for a national movement that, if need be, should assume political status and contest the next general election. That was the birth of ecological politics. That also goes back to the early 1970s. So I'm going to touch on the notion of social tipping points very quickly here. And I'm inspired in this by the work of Will Steffen, who said we need to reach a social tipping point before we reach a planetary one. Will Steffen is a leading member of the Stockholm Resilience Center that has been a leader in the whole work around the Anthropocene, the science of the Anthropocene and Earth systems science. But he recognizes that we need to reach a social tipping point, which is a critical point beyond which significant and often unstoppable effect or change takes place. And like peaks in an epidemic, you don't really know you're at one till you're past it. So we have climate tipping points, and then the notion that's emerged out of that of tipping point cascades, that one tipping point can trigger another tipping point that triggers another tipping point that triggers another tipping point. And they refer to this in climate science as tipping cascades. And if we get these, then a global tipping point cannot be ruled out, and this could be an existential threat to civilization. So then the question is, how about social tipping points? And, oh, sorry, I should have had a definition there that somehow didn't get changed. But Timothy Lenton's work on social tipping points is worth looking at. And then in a recent article that was about social tipping points, there is the potential that we can activate a contagious process of rapidly spreading technologies, behaviors, social norms, and structural reorganization. So how do we get to social tipping points? Here's some examples of social tipping points we've already seen. Tobacco use, social acceptability of drinking and driving, gay marriage. These are things that 30 or 40 years ago were big problems, and there were periods when they changed quite rapidly, most recently with gay marriage, but it was a quite rapid process once it started to happen. So the question is, can we trigger not only negative cascades, but positive, or what we called here virtuous cascades? This is, for those of you who don't know, Thomas Homer Dixon is establishing at Royal Roads University the Cascade Institute. It's about to be launched. In fact, I think the official launch is Monday. I'm on the scientific advisory board, I should add. And this is from their background, the Institute's background materials. In today's complex, hyper-connected global system, a series of precisely targeted and timed interventions could plausibly produce a virtuous cascade of change that flips us into a more positive path. So that's what the work of the Cascade Institute is going to be about. The website is already up if you want to go take a look and get more on this. So in one of my columns a few weeks ago, I talked about 8 possible social tipping points that are arising from COVID. One is that our quality of life, we're realizing, can be better. People are saying, oh, I like that I can breathe the air. I like I can see the mountains. I like I can hear the birds. I like that life is a bit slower and I'm more back in my family and community. Secondly, we're realizing the huge price we pay for our way of life. We're hearing about the decline in not just air pollution, but we know resulting from that, the decline in mortality associated with air pollution. We've seen 50% reductions in motor vehicle crash deaths in places like France and California. We're beginning to recognize we pay a huge price for our way of life. And of course, we need to remember that many people far away pay a much greater price for our way of life. They're paying the price for the life we enjoy. Thirdly, we're realizing that whether it's viruses or carbon dioxide molecules, exponential growth is a really bad idea, and we need to transfer that learning from COVID to the climate emergency. Fourth, fifth, and sixth, and these really all tie together in a way, that social solidarity matters, that government matters, and that local matters. So we're learning that this notion that you're on your own is toxic. We're learning that peace, order, and good government completely outperforms the US model, which some are likening to a failed state at this point, and that local matters a lot, whether it's local stores, local governments, local neighbors, parks, and so on. Seventh, we're learning, or at least beginning to recognize, that if we could act this swiftly and this massively on COVID-19, why can't we do it, but with a bit more time for thought and planning, to an even greater and slower crisis, which is climate or global ecological change. And eighth, we're recognizing that nature bats last, back to that Mother Nature video at the beginning. We shouldn't rely upon outwitting and outperforming nature. So I want to close by talking about the notion of bouncing forward, not roaring back. And my thoughts on this were triggered by this comment from Justin Trudeau couple of weeks ago, that our country will come roaring back, to which my response is, no, we don't want to come roaring back. Do we really want to roar back to all these things, to expanding fossil fuel use, rising carbon dioxide levels, poor air quality, motor vehicle crashes, pollution, busy, stressful lives, and so on, accelerating species extinctions? Is that what we want to roar back to? William Rees in the Tyee a couple of weeks ago commented that normal, the business as usual, is in fact the pathology. So you don't want to roar back to the pathology. This notion of resilience that we're hearing about now, let us be clear that resilience means bouncing forward, not back to the way we were before. You don't want to rebuild in the floodplain when the floods are going to keep coming. And that applies in a much wider scale to society as a whole. So we need to be bouncing forward to a different sort of future, a better future, a clean, green, and sustainable economy, the meeting of human and social needs and rights for all, a slower, more community-based way of life, perhaps, the restoration of natural systems. These are some of the things we should be designing our economy to deliver. It is, in other words, a just transition to something like the Green New Deal. We need, in other words, smart resilience, which is bouncing forward, not dumb resilience, which is bouncing or roaring back. We need to move towards a very different economy. And this is Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, a couple of weeks ago. Here, we simply cannot return to where we were before COVID struck. And then at the end, the recovery must lead to a different economy. So as Eric Doherty, my friend and colleague here, wrote recently, if we can change everything for one kind of emergency, why not do it for another, for the global ecological crisis, the Anthropocene? So finally, some thoughts on hope and opportunity, because we need, in the face of all of this, a sense of hope. And the antidote to despair, which all of this can trigger, is hope. I love this definition of it from a couple of colleagues of mine. Hope is the commitment to positivity in the face of adversity. And there are messages of hope out there already. We know out of the public health field, for example, that the shift to a more ecologically sustainable society results in health gains from a healthier way of life. I should add, incidentally, that there's evidence that shows that recessions actually lead to improved health across the population. It's economic expansion that leads to harming health or a slowing of health improvements. Secondly, we've successfully helped to create major societal shifts in favor of health before. I mentioned a couple already. And thirdly, we're not alone in all of this. We have many potential partners out there that we can be working with. Fourthly, for the most part, we know what needs to be done. We've known it for a very long time, as I pointed out earlier. And in fact, there are many examples, and Francis and Creatively United on their website have lots and lots of local examples of this, of people and organizations and businesses and communities who are doing the right thing and setting an example. So we know what we need to do. We know it can be done. In many cases, it's already being done somewhere. We just need to grow those seeds of hope. And in the midst of all of this crisis lies great opportunity. The fact that everything has to change, in fact, does present endless opportunities. And let's face it, it's my generation that screwed things up, and the generation before mine, and perhaps the current generation in power. I'm 71 now, so I'm getting on a bit, and not that much actually. The younger generation will be the one that has to reinvent almost everything. But remember that it's largely a cultural transformation, a social, economic, political, cultural, ideological, philosophical, ethical, spiritual problem. So yes, we're going to need innovative scientists and technologies, but we also need social innovators, the philosophers, artists, writers, video makers, social activists, faith communities who can express and communicate new values in appealing ways. And we need the new green and social entrepreneurs who will create this new economy we need, who will provide new jobs while improving both human and social development for all and improving ecosystem health. But none of this will happen if we don't have conversations across our communities, if we don't learn about and discuss this. If we don't learn about it and discuss it, we can't begin to imagine, design, and create a new one. So the organization I've recently set up with many good friends and partners is called Conversations for a One Planet Region. And our mission, very simply, is to establish and maintain community-wide conversations in this region, the capital region of British Columbia, on one planet living and a one planet region. And with that, I will end. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Trevor. Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. It's always a pleasure to hear and read what you have to share. Well, on this final day of our EarthFest webinar series, in honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we'd like to honor some of the key people behind the Earth Day movement. With us is, we're hoping that his screen will go live any moment, is Nigel Seal, an Irish-born ecopreneur and businessman, often cited as a strategic visionary and sought-after advisor to humanitarian ventures. There you are, Nigel. Nigel had a great start in the construction business in the early 1970s, building over 100 homes on Vancouver Island, including one of the earliest energy-efficient homes using breakthrough insulation and ventilation technology. During that same time, Nigel was the first Greenpeace representative in the Victoria region and co-creator of Victoria's BC's original recycling center. Nigel was one of the first socially responsible investment specialists in Canada in the early 1980s. And in the late 1980s, Nigel founded Earth Day Canada. There he is, a younger Nigel. He chaired the first nationwide Earth Day in 1990, where more than 2 million Canadians participated in Earth Day activities from coast to coast. His board of directors included many well-known Canadian luminaries, including David Suzuki, Elizabeth May, Norman Jewison, Peter C. Newman, Margaret Atwood, and 40 other leading figures in environment, business, and entertainment. Because of the great success of Earth Day in Canada, Nigel was tasked with chairing the Earth Day event internationally for 1991 and 1992. And during this time, Earth Day became ubiquitous, with over 150 countries participating in Earth Day events worldwide. Today, Earth Day is celebrated globally by over 500 million people, and April 22nd is almost on every country's calendar, thanks in part to Victoria resident Nigel Seal. Jed Goldberg, who's with us as well, was the president of Earth Wave. Jed, so we see you there. Was president of Earth Day Canada from 1991 to 2014. Under his direction, Earth Day Canada grew from a small fledgling organization to one of Canada's most respected environmental charities and was a recipient of many awards. Jed is frequently interviewed as an expert in the area of environmental protection and renewable energy, and has been actively involved in community-based renewable energy initiatives and natural plant-based products. He and his wife, Shayla, who is a yoga instructor, are happy to have retired to Victoria from Ontario. Pierre Lessier is currently the president of Earth Day Canada and has been in charge of managing and overseeing the design and implementation of programs and initiatives for Earth Day in Quebec since its founding in 1991. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you all for your contributions to making this world a better place. So I'd love to start with a question to all of you, and you can all decide who's going to jump in. If you could maybe just share with us some of your most memorable moments and proudest achievements during your involvement with Earth Day Canada. Should we start with you, Nigel? Or?
Yeah, I would say that the day after Earth Day, looking at the Globe and Mail newspaper and seeing that about 2.5 million Canadians participated in Earth Day, planted trees, went on walks, etc. I really felt like, wow, that was an accomplishment, and it was a group accomplishment, not just my accomplishment. It was done by people and right across the country.
And I recall you saying, Nigel, when we had a little chat last week, when you said you really felt that something finally happened that you always wished for, and you said that you had hoped it would be finally, like what everybody would finally stop. That was something that you said would really be a goal that you wanted to see in your career, was everything would stop. And here we are.
Yeah, we've been stopped. We chose to be stopped. We were stopped. And we're now, I think we're already seeing the benefits around the world about that stopping. Sky's clearing up for sure around here. I don't see any jet contrails in the sky at all. I can hear the birds singing in the morning, not the traffic, and the birds can hear each other.
Right. And back to like some of your, most memorable moments and proudest achievements, Jed or Pierre, you guys have had so much happen over these years.
I guess the proudest achievement for me was when we recognized as an organization that for us to be relevant and have the most impact on Canadians positively, we had to stop being the organization that was there to promote Earth Day and transition to an organization that provided tools and resources and even money for grassroots community-based environmental action. And we developed a suite of programs, and our organization grew and grew. And to me, that was the tipping point that really made Earth Day Canada much more relevant.
Yeah, but I do some, Tom, we say on fait du pouce avec Jed ici, and what he's telling, getting this, kind of stopping celebrating Earth Day, but being an organization and building programs and being relevant, and I guess the achievement is to be part of it. I'm very grateful for all of Nigel and Jed's work, so I can continue their work into this organization. And this is it. I think this is the greatest achievement, is to be part of this.
Excellent. Nigel, you've got so many stories. Can you just share one with us, like something that's really memorable?
I remember being in the Earth Day office. I used to get in there at about 5 in the morning just so I could do some thinking, but right away I'd be fielding phone calls. And we had a lot of volunteers and things like that, but they didn't usually show up until around 9, 10 in the morning. So I got one call that was from Sault Ste. Marie. And a gentleman on the end of the line was saying to me that the river the St. Mary's River running through there was polluted, like really badly polluted. And he wanted to know if he could join something that might be happening in that area in order to support the cleanup of that river. So I kind of looked through our files quickly and I went, no, I don't see anything happening there. I said, so one of our little sayings when we were organizing Earth Day Canada was, we put after the words Earth Day Canada, we put, what will you do? Which was trying to, so anyway, I just asked him, well, what will you do on that day? And he said, well, I don't know, I was just thinking I'd join a walk or something. And I said, well, no, actually nothing's happening in Sault Ste. Marie to do with that river on that day for far as I can see. So I gave him a hint. I said that in New York, in 1970 Earth Day, they held a funeral for the river, the Hudson River, and they walked down the side of the river with holding coffins with the Hudson River written on the side of it. And I said, I think we need to be more proactive than that. So I would suggest that you organize a walk, and at the end of it, you have people that would have answers and solutions that really know how to clean that river up. So Earth Day came and went, and I guess a couple of days later, I was in the office working away in the morning, and that gentleman phoned me, and he told me about how he stood on a hill and watched literally thousands of people walking. And at the end of that walk, there were people that talked about how to clean that river up naturally and how to oxygenate it using proper, stones and things like that. And just anyway, that was the conversation. And I could say today that the St. Mary's River is cleaned up, and I really felt like that was a remarkable moment for me.
So it just goes to show one person can definitely make a difference, as you did. You inspired him and he inspired others. And I know, Jed, you had many years with Earth Day. There's got to be at least one story in there for you.
Oh, there's lots of stories. Well, one thing that comes to mind, and this is a very good indication of how technology has changed over the years. We would produce every year an event poster that we would distribute across the country to our local organizers. And I guess it was in the maybe 93, 94, 95, something like that, in the mid 90s, we decided to get an 800 number, and we put, for more information, call this number. We were so inundated with calls that it almost bankrupted us. It was totally nuts. These days it's so easy to communicate. Everything can be done electronically. In those days, it just wasn't happening. We didn't have the same kind of organizing tools that we have now. And it really made life a little more difficult for us, but we somehow made our way through.
I think it's really remarkable, actually, when you think about it. No internet, no cell phones, and yet you bring thousands and thousands and thousands of people together. Like, that's really, truly remarkable. And how do you do that? Like, it sounded to me like getting great people on your board, getting, good people behind you. It's that power of the network, right? Of harnessing your networks.
It is that, but it's also making people appreciate their ownership of the environment in their community, mm-hmm. and make them understand that it's not going to be some magic formula, quick fix that's going to make things work. They need to understand that the most relevant, important, and impactful environmental work is the work that's done at the local level, and that's what really gets them going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's about naming also. This is Earth Day. It's about naming the movement. I always compare this. This is kind of the Earth Day is the hand on the skin of the drum. And it's also these things that you have to name so people can understand what the crisis is and what the movement is about and what they get involved. So it's either I think internet, no internet, posters and this and that. It's because there's such a rallying cry for Earth Day and naming it, and so it belongs to everybody. And this is, I think, it's just the movement that is created, and I think, yeah.
You want to give some advice to people who are maybe organizing? Some more advice? Give us your top tips. How to get involved? What does it take? How do you create a movement? How do you get people engaged? Don't rush in, everyone.
That's the question that the environmental movement has been asking itself for the last 50 years. And it's difficult. It depends on where you are and what the local issues are. But I really, going back to what I said before, you get people involved by making them appreciate how important the local environment is to them and how their actions have big impact.
Yeah. The strong movement of Earth Day is it's always going to be local on a small scale, like a alley, a borough, and also it has to go to, I think this is I don't think it's a mistake, but it has to be balanced between, there's so much science now, and I know I'm going into a territory that this is kind of but we need to go and ask the intelligence of the heart. It has to be. It's going to be heart driven. It's going to be love is going to be, the driving factor of it. Then, of course, the intellect of it is interesting, but it's not going to reach. And I think this is what the beauty of Earth Day, and I think the scope that we need to achieve with Earth Day, because there's it's quite a large movement, but there's more to do, obviously. So this is kind of the touch the hearts of Canadian and and humanity.
I know I've heard Jed and Nigel both just go on about you, Pierre, like, wow, you should see what this guy's doing in Quebec. Tell us a bit about what have you been doing in Quebec, because it sounds like it's been pretty remarkable.
The problem is I've done this all in French, so now I have to all translate them, it's very difficult. I did this podcast with Amazon Web Services, and I couldn't say this. So I achieved something. I did the 4 first refrigerated 100% renewable, zero emission, lightweight truck in Canada. We're doing programs with distributed rain barrels, about 100,000 of them. We're distributed compost bin, another 50,000 of them. We're on to distribution of kits that are lowering your impact on single usage of plastic. So we took Jed's, and I mean, this is Nigel, Jed, and we took the idea of doing programs, being an organization that is doing. So the funding that we achieve is through our program throughout the years, and we have a campaign on Earth Day, and it's the first time we're Canadian, so I've been working on Jour de la Terre since 1995. The first time of being in charge of Earth Day Canada is, it's this 2020, so it's very particular. But it's the first time that you have a national. It's been a while since there was a national campaign, a poster, an ad. So and at the center of it, there's always something. An ad, a very strong ad. If you go to our website at earthday.ca, you can see the ads. Of course, most of them will be in French, but and we have a couple of one coming. We had to postpone one. We had a very strong one. We had 2 campaigns this year, but we're going to postpone one to next year because it was too strong, and we felt it was kind of a playing with fire with this. But you'll see it. We still have so basically. A very strong marketing campaign about the Earth. It's the Earth campaign,
right?
And a kind of a Greenpeace campaign. So it's kind of shocking, but also a gesture of the hand that is kind of a program that will help you lower your impact on the environment. This is a sophisticated program, we like to say.
From the heart, right? And
this is it. This again, we're a populist move, kind of in a good sense of a populist movement. It's like we aim at the people that are not convinced already.
I just want to show you, or let everybody watch and listen to a little something here. I know it'll be a bit of a surprise for you, but I just think this is an opportunity to bring this up. This was shared with us this past week from, someone that you definitely know by the name, and a lot of Victorians know as Maurice Stearns.
All of your creatures, great and small, they're sisters and brothers, one and all. Will what we do to them befall us too?
So that's one of your campaigns way back when you started. I gather you commissioned Maury to do that original piece, and that's like to the heart, right? You were thinking about that all the time, eh, Nigel?
Yeah, that was a good one. That one went really well. Actually, we took it into the International Earth Day, and it was quite a big hit there too. So yeah, Maury was instrumental.
I'm going to jump into questions. We have several of them here. So some of these are for Trevor as well. So let's just see. And you guys jump in when it seems like you're the person to answer the question. This question's from David. It's, what is the role of ecological restoration in turning this whole mess around?
It's central. As I said right at the beginning, we live on the earth. The earth gives us everything. I start my talks about ecological determinants of health by asking the audience how well they do without oxygen, water, and food, all of which comes from nature. So ecological restoration matters to us, but it also matters because we need to move away from the view that we're the only species that counts. And I mean, there are a few species I am not sorry to see go extinct, like the smallpox virus. But by and large, that is not the way we should be behaving. So ecological restoration isn't just for us, it's for all the other species with whom we share this planet.
Very good. This one's from Jim. It says the global human species consumes more and more energy each year. Mark Jacquard's book, The Citizen's Guide to Climate Success, describes a hopeful global pathway to dealing with this issue. What are your ideas as how individuals and NGOs can work for its implementation?
At 2 o'clock today, I'm actually doing a somewhat similar presentation to a group here called the South Island Climate Action Network. And that's about a dozen or so, maybe more local groups. There's one in my neighborhood called What's Next Gorge Tillicum that are looking at what do we do in our neighborhood around climate change. So there's everything from that. I'd say a simple thing that affects climate change that we can all be doing is to reduce our meat consumption, which is a major driver, certainly at a regional level here. The ecological footprint for Victoria shows that food is about 45% of our ecological footprint, and 75% of that food footprint is in meat, fish, dairy, and eggs. So we need to be thinking about what we eat at a personal level. We need to be, we've got a wonderful opportunity to do all the telecommuting. Let's keep telecommuting going. If 20% of the population on average did not commute each day, but went to their local telecommute centers, then you would both dramatically reduce energy use, and you'd also start building or rebuilding community through those telecommute centers that bring people together in the local community or neighborhood.
Well, very good point, because I mean, right now, a lot of us are working from home, and look at the roads. It makes you really look at the amount of money and that goes into that kind of infrastructure. And you think, wow, our air's better. I'm finding my stress level being at home is much less from not having to dash here and there. So that idea of going to a telecommute center or working from home, I think this is really helping people be more aware of that. So this question's from David. Is it capitalism that has brought us to this point? Well, I can tell Trevor's dying to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's a couple more questions I saw in the list, so I'll, in a sense, answer several of them perhaps at once. It is capitalism, but I wouldn't simply say throw out capitalism and replace it with, say, another ism like socialism. From the point of view of the environment, whether it's state capitalism or free enterprise capitalism, it's all bad, in as much as it's all about growth and consumption and externalizing environmental and health costs and ignoring them. So we need a very different sort of economics, the sort of economics that Kate Raworth puts forward, the sort of economics that is in a book called Enough is Enough. One of the co-authors of that is Dan O'Neill, is actually from Victoria, although he teaches at Leeds University in England now. And it's about an economics of enough. And that's something that Herman Daly has championed in terms of a steady state economy for, I don't know, 40 years or more. The other thing is to think about, when I talk to business groups, I say, you know, none of you are actually capitalists, because, and I don't actually get invited very often, as you can imagine, but none of you are actually capitalists because you're only seeing one form of capital and you're growing that form of capital, financial capital, economic capital, at the expense of the other forms of capital, which are social and human and natural capital. And if you really want to be a capitalist in the 21st century, then you need to simultaneously build all four forms of capital. And if you're not doing that, you're actually a fake capitalist in the 21st century.
This one's from Douglas. Have you seen Michael Moore and Gibbs' new film, Planet of the Humans? And if you have, can you please comment?
I have seen the film, and it's very disturbing and very sobering, and full of really very, very interesting information. The difficulty I have with the film is that he sort of builds up his case and his thesis to the extent that near the end of the film, you're quite upset about the state of the environment, particularly the use of renewable energy as some kind of a tool to get us out of the energy crisis. But what they don't do in the film is provide any kind of optimism at the end or solution, or give people a sense of what they can do to have some kind of an impact. It does make a very clear case about the difficulties we're having in the energy sector and the difficulties we have in renewable energy. And the one thing that, again, was kind of neglected is the need that we have to promote the most plentiful source of energy that we have that has no impact at all, and that's conservation. And we simply don't do enough in that area. And it's easy to put up wind turbines and solar arrays, but that's not necessarily the answer. I think we have to be much more basic and really look at what we are using and why we're using it.
It's part of a long tradition, it seems to me. You go back to the film Koyaanisqatsi or the more recent film, The Anthropocene, and both of them, Koyaanisqatsi, 30 years ago now, they tell us how bad things are and then stop. Yeah. That's not helpful.
No.
And part of what the work you do, Francis, the part of what I ended with, the thing we need to be focused on is not the problem. We know the problem. We need to be finding the hope and the opportunity and broadcasting it.
Absolutely. And Creatively United is a solutions hub, a community solutions hub. So where you find those kind of solutions, where you find those resources, where you can share your information. So we really invite people to use that. This one's from Raymond. Recently, I learned that the Environmental Voters Project that environmentalists in the US are try that again. Recently, I learned from the Environmental Voters Project that environmentalists in the US are notorious for not voting. How do we get the ecologically minded ecological economists to vote?
I would say that it's no good complaining if you don't do something about it, and go out and vote your heart and vote your conscience. If you've got a Green Party candidate, vote for them, because they're going to be much more in tune with what you want. Nothing's going to be perfect. Politics is the art of compromise, but you start with the right values. You support a party, get engaged with it for that matter, and be politically active, whether it's in your own neighborhood or all the way up to the national level. But get involved. Don't just sit there and complain.
Right. Thank you. Thor said, Guy Dauncey mentioned the fact that we're growing now about 70 million more people every year. I'd like to hear any thoughts our speakers have about the importance of population stabilization that's necessary to reach a state of homeostasis. It's
a question that often comes up. A couple of things. First of all, there was the American Natural History Museum just put out a nice little video about both the bad things and the good things that have happened in the last 50 years since Earth Day. Worth a look, it's 5 minutes. But one of the things they point out is that the rate of population growth is growing. It's now down to, I think, about 2.5 children per woman at the age of fertility, and it needs to be a little over 2 to get a stable population. But the key thing there, it goes back to the point about fair shares. So one of the things we know from the development work is that when you educate and when you engage people in the labor force, women in particular, when you educate and engage women, birth rates go down. And so the answer to the birth rate problem, paradoxically, is more development in low-income countries. As I said at the outset, or during our presentation, they do not currently get their fair share. So the combination of economic development, which buys you universal education, particularly education of women, and their access to fertility control, but also their engagement with the labor force. These are the kind of things that lead to smaller family sizes. So in low-income countries in particular, an important part of the answer is economic development, so that you have some sense of security, a sense that your children are not going to die young, a sense that you are going to be looked after in old age. And with that security comes smaller families. So I see that as the prime answer.
Education of women and girls, number one that I've been hearing, definitely. So Blake says, what will it take to live in sacred reciprocity with all life? It would seem to require a change of heart. How do you engineer a change of heart?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that the environmental movement made for the first 30 odd years was scaring people, and all kinds of doom and gloom, and really, really negative messaging. And it had the opposite effect that we had hoped it would have. So it actually paralyzed people and made them less interested in being involved, because they didn't think that their little actions would have any kind of an impact. So I think really that that's the key. And we've been talking about this earlier too, that people need to appreciate that the most relevant and important environmental work happens in your neighborhood. And once they really truly appreciate that and understand how their actions can have big impact, then hopefully they'll be even more involved. But you need people to have some sense of hope, and you have to put tools in their hands so that they know what they can do themselves to be able to reduce their own personal environmental impact.
Excellent. Pierre or Nigel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I don't agree with the hope part of it. I think basically hope's a longing for a future condition over which you have no agency. And I think when hope dies, action begins. So I don't think hope's needed at all. And it's referred to by people of my ilk. And I know these two gentlemen, well, Jed might say I'm being a bit dark here or whatever, but I'd say that when hope dies, action does begin. And it might be fine for prisoners, but free women and men don't need hope. I think this selling of hope is...
Okay, what do they need, Nigel?
Well, like I say, when hope dies, action begins. Like
that's getting kind of more to the desperate side, but in the interim,
I don't think it's desperate. I think we're in a desperate situation right now. We don't have a wolf that culls our herd, and we're all working real hard to get this vaccine out so that wolf doesn't cull our herd. And so we're overpopulated, which I think somebody was talking about before here. Trevor was talking about overpopulation and how many planets is going to be required to hold us.
But Guy Dauncey says that, it's the way we manage our resources and the way we're treating our planet that's more to the issue than our population. So
I don't believe in my fellow man to actually do that. I can't see any indication of it. So,
right.
and I bet being quiet here because I haven't wanted to rain on the parade here. But from me seeing all of what I do see, I don't have a lot of confidence. I think it's going to take a massive cull of us for us to wake up. I don't think we're going to come
All right.
out.
Well, I'm staying positive, and that's what this program is about.
Yeah.
And everyone's entitled to their opinion, and that's what makes the balance of the yin and yang.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to another question. Government seems to have handed corporations free access to our natural resources. How can we protect what's left?
Change the government.
Seriously.
Vote, right? Vote. Gotta get the vote.
Well, it's not just government. We need to have a full court press with all sectors of society, and government plays a very important role there, because they have to provide the proper legislation and incentives for people to want to do things that make a difference. And it's been shown in many different examples how these incentives do get people to change. They could be financial. There's many different ways that they can work, but you need to support and help all the progressive candidates out there that are interested in actually changing the foundation of our political system.
Thank you. Two questions.
Can I just jump in very quickly? So a couple of things. I think it's in a sense deeper than that, because there is a notion out there of private ownership that says that you can own a coal mine and basically do what the hell you like with it, or a forest or whatever, that there's no public interest in what you do with it. And we have environmental protection laws that try to do that. But I think that we are going to have to shift to an understanding of the commons, the shift of environmental rights and the rights of nature itself. So it's a much more profound shift in our understanding about rights. And I also cannot let Nigel go unchallenged, and I know you were pushing back. I completely disagree that when hope dies, action starts. Usually when you kill hope, you kill action.
From Kim, we have so many NGOs and environmental organizations with ideas and volunteers, all working on segments of solutions for a more ecologically balanced future. How can we get out of our silos and work together as a team? The fossil fuel companies have one voice and appear to get more eartime from the politicians as a result. Well, I kind of think she almost answered her own question. We've got to unite, correct? And hence why we're creatively uniting. Trevor, did you want to add anything to that? Is that part of something you'd like to just jump on?
Well, I think to a certain extent we have to unite, but I also believe in the notion of, let 1,000 flowers bloom. There is some benefits to having lots of small groups doing lots of different small things. There may be some overlap and redundancy, but better than that than having gaps. But I do think we need these big, broad societal objectives. We have to think about, for example, what business are we in as a government or a society? Right now it's making money and screwing the environment. And making money for a small number of people who are obscenely rich. We need to think about what business we're in. It's not economic development, it's human and social development. And so at that big broad level, things like the Green Party or concepts such as the Green New Deal start to become conceptual ideas that we can organize around and move in. And we used to talk about creating a big umbrella. I much prefer the notion we need to build a common platform that people can step onto and step off.
Okay. Well, thank you. Is there anyone who wants to add anything? I'm going to.
Yeah, I'll add to this that yes, Earth Day is about uniting. Kind of and I would caution about this is the green political movement is it's a political movement, and the NGOs and United, the NGO working together. I think they do work together. There's a lot of networks. We communicate a lot, NGOs together, and Earth Day is certainly an umbrella for this unification.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. That was really engaging, and I appreciate all your sage wisdom. So John Reardon, our Climate and the Arts partner, and our Sunday opening keynote speaker, Bob Sanford, are now going to provide a quick summary of what we just heard for this entire week and introduce our new webinar series starting this Wednesday called Creative Solutions for a New World, our Climate and the Artists series. John, by the way, I'd like to add, is a former Deputy Minister of the Environment and co-authored 2 books with Bob Sanford. We give thanks to John for successfully advocating for the protection of the Great Bear Rainforest, and to Bob for his work to protect and preserve Canada's freshwater sources, democracy, and so much more. All right, John, over to you.
Thank you, Francis, and good afternoon, everybody. Like many of you, I was initially disappointed that we were unable to present Earthfest live in Cedar earlier this month. But on reflection, I think there might be some blessings that we've transferred to a video format. We've had a very rich presentation from our speakers about their climate stories, and we've had an engaging opportunity to answer questions and get dialogue. Winston Churchill said that we should never waste the opportunity to learn from a crisis. Well, I think we did that with the 2008-2009 financial crisis. In that case, we won the war, but we lost the peace. The economy came roaring back. the carbon footprint increased and we continued to destroy our precious ecosystems. So post-COVID, when we have a vaccine, how do we win the peace? Well, we have a fork in the road. We can go back, as Trevor said, to roaring back to our old economy and continue to create the crisis that we're trying to resolve, or we can embark on a new economy, an economy for a new civilization. So this series has pushed us into that direction, and I want to advocate this according to 7 principles. So what are these principles? Well, the first is that a new civilization, we must meet our basic needs while restoring our ecosystems and securing our health and our systems to support our healthy environments. And I think Bob Sanford, in his opening presentation on a transformative moment and the new need for a global reset, aptly identified the need for such principles in a new economy. Secondly, we have to shift power from our corporations to one of meeting the bottom line of shareholders to one where we have cooperatives that are self-reliant and meet community needs and develop the economies of kindness. And Guy Dauncey, in his presentation on the new ecological civilization, clearly exemplified these particular principles. Thirdly, we must be able to grow nutritious food and protect our soils and maintain its structure and its continuity. And the work of Caroline Harriott and Gary McDougall in showing that we can do this in our backyards is very edifying. And also, we can also do this across all of the agricultural systems around the world. Fourthly, we have to reconcile with our indigenous peoples. We have to learn from the knowledge and wisdom that they've gained from living on this earth for millennia. And the wonderful presentations by Geraldine Manson and Nancy Turner eloquently showed the importance of traditional knowledge in this new environment. Fifthly, we have to redesign our communities. We have to think about the kind of housing that we have. We have to make these communities and housings net zero in terms of carbon, in terms of water resource use, in terms of energy, and in terms of transportation and living with nature. And we had wonderful examples of these presented by Jack Anderson, Buran Desai, Ken Nantwig, and Chad Thiessen. And they showed us that that technology is available, and we just need the power and political will to make it happen. And sixthly, we have to retain our self-reliant communities and make sure that they are recycle, regenerative agriculture, they put us in touch with nature, and more importantly, we have dialogues and conversations that reinforce our own interests in these communities. And Trevor Hancock's inspiring presentation today showed us that the One Planet Society can move us in that direction locally here in the Greater Victoria area. And finally, we have to nurture our youth and make sure that they have the right skills and hope to take on the mantle that we're having to lead us through this new society. They will be the ones that take on this responsibility 20, 30 years from now. And I don't know about you, but I was fully inspired by the 9 youth that presented midweek on their hopes and futures for this new world that we're engaging with. And I wish them the very best of luck in working on that over the next few years. So finally, the social tipping point. I think that we will have a truly sustainable society when our self-interests aligns with the interests of the planetary interest. And I think we've shown that we can align our self-interest with the community by self-isolating during this COVID. And I hope that we continue to learn that lesson as we move forward into the new peace. So with that in mind, we are continuing 2 series on new creative solutions for a new society. One will be a climate series based on policy, and the second will be an artistic series based on spirituality, religion, and the creative arts. I'm going to turn now to Bob Sanford to talk about the climate series.
Well, thank you very much, John. I'd like to begin, if I may, by expressing the sincere thanks of our United Nations Institute for your invitation to be involved in this most remarkable webinar series. It's been an honor to work with you. And I also want to commend you for the extraordinary quality of the presentations that you've offered this week. And today's, again, was simply outstanding. And I would like, however, to especially thank all of those who contributed to the webinar on youth perspectives on Wednesday. I would like to offer that was one of the very best webinars I've ever been on. And I hope that we as a UN agency can collaborate further with those amazing youth leaders. And as I mentioned in the presentation I gave to kick off this series, we have, in partnership with the Gail O'Riordan Climate and the Arts Legacy Project, created an informal collaboration to bring about positive change in the post-pandemic world. And we call this collaboration the Transformational Moment, Global Reset, and the Future of Hope. And I should point out, however, that it's really more of an invitation than it is a structured initiative. And the premise of our ongoing collaboration is that while it would be critical to rebuild our societal structure once this pandemic is managed, the world won't be and shouldn't be the same again, as was clearly indicated in the discourse today. Our interest should reside not in recreating the world we had, but the world we want. And what we're offering is an invitation for people to imagine that world for themselves. And as we saw this week, there are many who are of the view that we should be using this hiatus to thoughtfully consider how we can restructure in ways that perpetuate our gains in carbon emissions reductions. We should also be using this time to make other critically needed changes to our economies and lifestyle expectations that will make us not just less vulnerable to pandemics in the future, but bolster meaningful, persistent action in achieving the goals of the United Nations 2030 Transforming Our World Global Sustainable Development Agenda, and to do so in time to ensure that we never come this close to crossing the threshold of societal collapse again. And the very valid point has been made that there will be many transformational moments spread over time in a broad range of sectors in our society, and we need to identify and track as many of these as we can. And it's become clear that to do that, we need to assemble a diverse group of thoughtful people with the goal of identifying when an optimal range of diverse transformational moments might align, and then to determine how best to act on those moments locally, nationally, and globally when that alignment occurs. And this clearly, what has happened this week shows that there are such people that wish to do that, and in our initiative, we've done that. An astonishing array of extraordinarily competent people have taken up the invitation, and many have already embarked on the identification of moments of critical transformation where careful and thoughtful intervention could make change possible. So in areas in which we've chosen to accept the invitation to participate, these include areas that we've been talking about today: the transformation of global energy, economy and finance structures, technological innovations, poverty reduction, the advancement of global equity, equality, and human rights, and planning for the post-pandemic social order. And these topics covered also nature's rights and environmental ethics in a post-pandemic reality, faith and religion, as well as reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So in partnership with Creatively United and the Gail O'Riordan Climate and the Arts Legacy Series, we'd very much like to offer to provide you with additional experts, ones in addition to the experts that you've had, the marvelous experts you've had this week, in any of these domains that may be of interest to you for future webinars in your ongoing series. So once again, it's been a great pleasure and an honor to work with you, and we look forward to doing so in the future. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you, John. This is all very exciting what's coming. That was a wonderful summary, and thank you for introducing our exciting Creative Solutions for a New World Climate and the Artist series. Now back over to John to introduce our final special guest.
Thank you again, Francis. As we had last Sunday, we brought in Brian Yoon, who's a principal cellist with the Victoria Symphony, to give us some creative music to support the thinking we have on a new economy and a new world. Brian was a mentor to my wife, Gail, in whose name the Climate and the Arts Legacy series is set. And she was a player with the symphony for 30 years and thoroughly enjoyed working with Brian.
Thank you.